Welcome to the Gamut of Performance Podcast, Episode 11. On this episode of the podcast, I get to talk to Coach Tim Wakeham. Coach Wakeham is the Director of Olympic Sports for Michigan State University and has been there for quite some time. Coach Wakeham and I get into how to periodize and train wrestlers, and we also talk a little bit about professionalism. We also talk a little bit about listening and some of the science behind listening and what produces or reduces effective listening. Thank you for joining us, and without further ado, here is Coach Tim Wakeham. Coach Wakeham, thanks for being on today. I really appreciate your time. Super excited to talk to you.
Happy to be here.
So for the listeners at home, would you mind just giving us a quick background and how and why you got into strength and conditioning?
Yep. So I was an athlete in high school and lifted weights with all my boys way back in the day. And after I got done, I really wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I thought perhaps I wanted to do something in coaching. And I went on to get my associate's degree at a local community college. It was close by to where I grew up. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to stay involved with the sports at my high school, so I volunteer coached as a JV football coach and as a assistant track coach. Okay. And then they needed somebody to run the weight room after practices, so I did that. Mm-hmm. So that was how I kind of got into it. And at the time, there wasn't really a title called a strength and conditioning coach, at least nothing that I knew about.
Okay.
So they asked me if I wanted to do an internship of some sort when I was in college, and I said yes, and I did my internship as a strength coach over with our high school. I did that for 2 years. Mm-hmm. Still didn't really realize that could be a possibility for me. Mm-hmm. So I transferred over to Northern Michigan University, and at Northern, I got my bachelor's degree. But in one of my fitness classes, one of the professors came in and said, "We have what's called an Olympic education site it's here at Northern Michigan, and it's for Nordic skiing," which is weird. The weird part was that they actually had resident boxers there.
Oh,
also,
okay. Gotcha.
Who were trying to get onto the national team or who were already on and competing. Mm-hmm. But they needed somebody to move into the Olympic training village, if you will. There's just basically dorms, but they needed somebody to move in and be their trainer. Mm-hmm. So the coach down at the Olympic Training Center down in Colorado Springs would send up workouts, but they needed somebody to implement them.
Gotcha. Okay.
So I volunteered, ended up interviewing and getting the position. So I moved into the village, or the dorms as they were. And then for that year, I worked as kind of a strength and conditioning coach, implementing programming for those guys. And I still really had no idea what I was doing. But I tried the best I could to learn. And after I got done with that, I went up to Duluth, Minnesota, chasing a girl.
Okay.
A job as a personal trainer. Okay. And I also worked as a outpatient physical therapy fitness guy, meaning that when they were able to walk, talk, basically, I brought them through fitness programming. So the good news about that was, number one, I became very motivated because what ended up happening is when you're handing out keys and towels and as a fitness trainer working at a health club after a 4-year degree, that hurts your self-esteem a little bit.
Yeah.
Something bigger than that. And I started looking for different types of jobs. And I happened to read an article in Sports Illustrated about a guy named Virgil Knight, I think his name was. Okay. He was a strength coach that they interviewed in Sports Illustrated, and he worked for the Packers, Green Bay Packers. So I called the Green Bay Packers organization, and I asked if I could talk to him. And still, I really had no idea. Very green, didn't really even know what I was asking. But they put me through to him, and then after that, we shared a conversation for about a half an hour, and he's the guy who told me there's a title called strength and conditioning coach. That's what I do. And I asked him how he got his job, and he said that he worked as a graduate assistant and got his master's degree, and that's how a lot of people do it. So he was the first one to kind of laid out a path for me, and I laid out a flow chart that night with my girl, and was to be a strength coach in the Big Ten Conference.
Okay.
And so I knew I needed to get a graduate assistantship.
Yeah.
I pursued a bunch of them. The first year I got turned down, didn't get any offers, and it was mostly, I think, because, well, I had very little experience, but in addition to that, my letters, I think, were poorly written.
Okay.
So you live, you learn, and you grow. Mm-hmm. So I did a better job preparing. I ended up getting 3 offers. Mm-hmm. One of them was at a place called Austin P in Tennessee.
Okay.
And the other one was at the University of Tennessee, but it was on the women's side because the men and women are separated at U of T at the time. And there was another one, the University of North Dakota. And I was a little bit leery of taking the position with Tennessee because it just worked with women. That didn't scare me, but I thought I might be pigeonholed and not be able to work with men afterward. I wasn't sure what people would think. And the other part that was appealing to me was that North Dakota was 5 hours away from Duluth, Minnesota. So on weekends, not many, but we could travel back and forth, my girlfriend and I. So that was a blessing. So I took the one at the University of North Dakota. Very challenging. I was there for 2 years, worked with a lot of sports, learned a lot. I didn't have job opportunities because we were so kind of out of the way.
Oh, okay.
Not a lot going through. Grand Forks, North Dakota was the problem. And I worked, I stayed on for a 3rd year there. I taught some classes, and I worked as a janitor at a local YMCA. Another humbling moment for me, but it really teaches you, both humility and work ethic and persistence, perseverance, which is, our field is so saturated now that that's one of the things I got to tell a lot of my guys now when they're coming out after graduate assistantship with me, that it's so saturated, you really have to persevere in the field to be able to do a decent job because there's a lot of people looking right now.
No, agreed, yeah.
So I ended up doing that a 3rd year, and then I took a job as a fitness coordinator at Michigan Tech University, which is in my hometown where I grew up in Michigan.
Okay.
Did that for a year, and the reason I took that position was because, while I had some other small offers, I thought that I might be able to volunteer because they didn't have a strength coach for a few of their sports. Didn't take long, and I talked to the coaches, and I was working for their Division I hockey program and their 2 basketballs who are very successful in Division II. So after a year, they promoted me to half-time strength coach and half-time fitness coordinator for faculty and staff. And during that time, I did some other things, like I'd gone to a lot of clinics, and I met a guy named Mark Asanovich. Mark was an assistant coach with the Minnesota Vikings, and he got me into work a few of their mini camps, so that got me a little exposure. I learned at the pro level a little bit. At some of the clinics that I had worked at, I met a guy named Ken Manny. Okay. And Ken spoke at a few clinics, and when I was at Michigan Tech, after my 2nd year, I saw that there was a position open at Michigan State, and I applied for it. I actually applied a day late, but he accepted the app. Okay. For me from a couple of clinics that we were both at, and he called me and he said, "Hey, I'd like to invite you down for an interview, and I already have someone that I'd like to see get the position, a graduate assistantship for me, or a graduate assistant for me, excuse me. And if you want to come down, though, for the experience, we'll pay your way down." And I said, yeah, I'd like to come down. So I came down. Interviews went well. Sure enough, he called me about a week later and said, we'd like to bring you back and have you work as our strength coach. And that was a tough position when I first got here. I worked with 23 teams, just up 700 athletes, and I was their first strength coach, and I had 0 assistants.
Wow, okay. That's tough.
I didn't get full-time assistant until my 13th year.
Wow, okay. That is crazy. Your story, man, it's like, that's a great story because I think it kind of shows like it's not straight line, you know what I mean? Progress isn't always a straight line. So I think that's a really good exemplification of that. And that's crazy. 23 sports, no assistants. Wow.
Yeah, listen, I wouldn't want to go back to that, and I wouldn't wish it on anybody. I say that I learned a lot of stuff, but it invited this. But I slept at the office. I probably was there a good 80 hours a week for my first maybe 8 years. Okay. There was nothing else. 0. I didn't take a vacation till my 10th year. I didn't call in sick till my 16th year.
Wow. Okay. That's crazy.
I'm not saying everybody has to do that. In fact, I'm suggesting that most try not to do that, because I gave up a lot in order to find some success. But what I am trying to say is, there's a price to be paid to be good at anything. I don't think you have to go overboard, and I think I did. I would change things if I went back. I wouldn't kind of, I think you can go overboard, and you have to be careful of burnout and things like that when you're involved, like I was involved. But when I didn't have anybody else as an assistant, you end up, having to commit at a high level. So
no,
you do what you got to do.
Yeah, and that's great to hear. I mean, that's tough. I can only imagine what you went through. So kind of taking a little bit of a step back, right? So your nickname is Red, or possibly part of your real name. I'm not sure. So will you explain that just a little bit more?
Well, obviously, because of my red hair is why people call me Red.
So there's no deeper meaning to that?
No.
Okay.
No deeper meaning, but I'm an Irishman, Irish, English, German, and the red hair came certainly with the Irish part of me. And when I was a young kid, one of my friend's brothers kind of gave me the moniker, and it stuck to the point where, when I was in sports and in school, teachers, coaches called me Red. If I was written about in the newspaper, they referred to me as Red, and obviously it just stuck. Okay,
fair enough. Awesome. So you kind of talked about how long you've been at Michigan State, right? So you've been there for 14 plus years. So can you explain a little bit of some of the qualities required to stay at some place for so long?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I'd go back to what I started with.
Okay.
In a position like this, probably any position like this, you're going to have a tireless work ethic. You're going to come in prepared and have done your work, and if you haven't done all of your work, you're going to have to do a lot of work to learn the landscape to get when you get here. You're going to have to be an outstanding communicator.
Yeah.
You're going to hear me say that part probably over and over again.
Okay.
Because you work with so many people. I'm talking to 200 or 300 people sometimes in a day.
Wow.
You really learn to be a very concise, enthusiastic, passionate communicator. That's key. You got to be organized.
Yeah.
Russ came in, small weight room, no assistants, a lot of people, big expectations. You got to be organized. You got to come in with a plan. So those would be my big three underpinnings, I would guess.
Okay. I mean, those are three good qualities, so I appreciate that. So what are some of the pieces that goes into creating a facility? Because you pretty much built that place up, right? So what are some of the pieces that people don't think about when they think about starting a program or, growing a program?
Well, you're going to have to reflect and take a look and say, what are my philosophies? That obviously dictate the type of equipment that you're going to have in there, but you're also going to have to look at the landscape and the practical realities and limitations that you have. How many athletes are going to be in there at the same time? When is everybody showing up? How are you going to schedule? What are the needs that all of these athletes have? So you're going to perform a needs analysis. You're going to talk to coaches and try to understand what their needs and wants are. It's a political position to some degree. You're going to have to do some listening and negotiate with everybody so that everybody feels comfortable and confident in the way that you're going to run things because you're part of a team.
Yeah.
You're going to have to look at resources also and talk to administration and make sure you've got backing. And if you've only got a limited amount of backing, especially if we're talking about finance, how are you going to allocate that money for the different priorities that you have? So I would say those are the biggest things.
Okay. And so with that, right, will you touch a little bit on weight room culture, what that means and how we can kind of create that?
Yeah, listen, I think culture is huge. I think most sport coaches want us to affect the kids, both enthusiastically, passionately, to discipline, all of that. So what I would describe, well, first of all, one of the things that I also add in is I believe that culture to a large degree dictates behavior.
Okay.
So it's up to us to really set ahead of time what we want as our culture. I believe what culture is our attitudes, actions, behaviors, and how we go about our business, in our landscape. And relationships that we have with all of these people as we pursue whatever it is our goals are, and then how we go about our business. Are you asking me how we create it also?
Just a little bit, not necessarily like on the grand scale, but just like little things that make a big difference.
Well, one of the keys, again, is communication and relationship building.
Okay.
I've got to learn, about my athletes as people. I've got to train them as warriors for what they're going to go out and do, both physiologically and psychologically. So I'd rate that as probably the number one thing in setting my culture. Number two would be setting standards, boundaries, consequences, and rewards. I say this all the time.
Yeah.
It has to be predictable so that everybody feels safe. You can't be changing your standards consistently or treating people differently because people talk, get upset when things are unfair. So there has to be a perception of safeness based on the consistency and the application. So it's not ambiguous of your standards, boundaries. And then you got to give, consequences. In life, there are consequences when you don't do things right. Nothing vindictive, of course, but small consequences so people understand what's expected and why it's expected and what happens when those standards aren't met. And then, of course, rewards, encouragement, that sort of thing.
Okay, that's a good answer. So a couple of the things that you've implemented there, right? You've implemented a nutrition education piece and also like a ACL program, right? So can you just talk about those a little bit?
Yeah, the nutrition, we didn't have a dietitian for many years now. We do now, but we didn't for many years when I was here. So when I first got here, I had read a lot of nutrition stuff, and I listened and talked with a lot of dietitians around the country. And I said, I'm kind of a narrower. I'm always trying to get to the most important thing, if you will. So when I talked to these dietitians, what I asked them was, if you had one suggestion that was really important for me in trying to establish some sort of nutrition education program, what would you suggest for me? And one of the common answers I got was you have to continue to communicate and educate these people with consistency, because doing drive-by education every once in a while is not going to have any meaningful impact. So I listened, and knowing that I couldn't have an actual dietitian on staff at that point, what I did was I put up 4 flat screen TVs, 2 on each side of our weight room because it's kind of an L-shaped weight room. Okay. And what I did is I made a kind of a nutrition trivia. So what I mean by that is like if you go to a restaurant or a bar and you can play trivia, you can see it. They used to have this at a lot of bars where you could go in and you'd play sports trivia or some sort of trivia. There'd be a question that would come up on the TV screen, then the answer would come up afterwards. So I made it a game. That's exactly what I did. So we ended up having about 300 or 400 slides that would go through as kind of a PowerPoint presentation with a nice appearance. And then there would be a question that would come up that would be nutrition related, and then an answer after that. As it kind of progressed to affect culture, what we did is we started to use a lot of different quotes regarding hard work and whatever our underpinnings are, precision execution, enthusiastic, selfless unity, those types of things, topics, if you will, would also show up in different quotes. So it ended up being well over 300 slides, and we just turned that on every day, and it would go through. And a lot of the kids would pick up on this stuff, and one of our things we'd want them to go home and have a nutrient-dense, varied plate of food. So we would tell them we wanted them to go home and eat a rainbow. Well, if they would see that on the televisions, and then I'd see somebody later that day getting on their biking home while I was out in the parking lot, and they'd say, I'm going home to eat a rainbow. Well, that would be a sign to me, obviously, that they were picking up on some of this stuff. That was one of the biggest things we did, probably to affect the nutrition education of our people kind of passively, along obviously just trying to have conversations consistently after practice where we would offer what we would call the tip of the day, and a lot of that would be related to nutrition. Regarding ACLs, ACLs are a complex problem. You're talking about non-contact ACLs, especially in females. Yeah, that's a tough issue because there's it's complex. There's so many different reasons, from anatomical and some things that we really have no control over.
I agree.
Not femoral notch size.
Yeah.
Q angle, all of these things which we can't really change much, to some things which we can change.
Yeah.
The things that we can change is, number one, a lot of females, at least from the high school level coming into the college level, come in with a posterior chain that is a lot weaker than what they have anteriorly. And if you compare them to men, it's not even close.
Yeah, yeah.
So what we do right off the bat is between calves, hamstrings, and gluteal musculature, we really try to work on increasing those three big muscle compartments, and also a special emphasis on hamstrings.
Okay.
We would also do some eccentric training to get some muscle stiffening, ligament stiffening. We would also do a lot of proprioceptively enriched things.
Okay.
Meaning, what I mean by that, that's just a fancy word to say we're going to do a lot of balance training and recovery training, kind of teaching them how they can safely recover from unexpected hits in the air and landing, things that you would see in a lot of different ACL programs.
Okay. No, that's good. And I like how you broke that down, right? Because in this day and age, a lot of people just like to use big words. Not necessarily that that's a huge word, but a lot of people like to throw out jargon, right, just to disguise what they're really talking about. So that's a big point. I appreciate that. Moving forward, right, so let's talk a little bit about professionalism. So a lot of people have a stigma, right, of what a strength coach looks like. Kind of the bald dude, with the beard that yells a lot, right? So, and if we don't fit that stigma, then it's not necessarily, we might not conform, or we might not mesh as well. So at what point does like professionalism and all that kind of stuff, right, how we look, how we talk, at what point does that become like blind conformity just to the institution? And is that like a good or a bad thing, or what are your thoughts on that?
Well, listen, I understand that we're all going to be judged on appearance, and that appearance sometimes leads to perceptions of credibility. I understand that that's the realism of our world at times. I don't care for it. Okay. I don't care for it because that would be me going into some local club and looking for the biggest guy, imagining that he was also the most intelligent guy and the guy that could help me, get bigger and stronger and so on. And so often, of course, that's not the case.
Yeah.
So I don't care for that. And listen, I'm 5'11", 180. I'm not bald. I don't have a goatee, and I'm not a 6'4", 285-pound guy.
Yeah.
I understand in football especially, there are expectations, and sometimes what I just described to you would be a guy that would be able to walk in, probably command the room without saying anything. The problem is, sooner or later, though, he is going to say something. That's really where the credibility, where the rubber is going to meet the road. So I've hired all different shapes and sizes, and will continue to do that. And I hope that when my people leave here, they can establish credibility and presence, because I teach them what presence is, and I also teach them to have a good knowledge base and to be good communicators, and if I can, mentor them. And I try to hire good people from the onset.
Okay.
And try to help them be good, better people. All of that is important to me. I'm more about substance than I am cosmetic appearance, and I would hope that most people are.
Yeah, and that makes sense, right? But where does that line with like the vernacular, or say the way that we talk, right? Because obviously everyone's come from different backgrounds. So if you're hiring a large variety of people, right? At what point? And obviously, there's certain things that shouldn't be said. But at what point, like, does vernacular and professionalism combine, or like, where's that line? Does that make sense?
Are you asking me how people should talk, or
is there a specific way that you're like, oh no, this person like is talking this way, that's not going to cut it? Like, what's that line aside from, of course, like heinous language? You know what I mean? Does that make sense a little bit?
Well, this is a tough question because in the sports setting, sometimes people will curse and swear, And sometimes you hear that in the weight room, and I certainly have at different times myself. The key for me when it comes to language is I don't want people to be hurtful, mean-spirited.
Yeah.
I don't mind people being intense. I understand that people are emotional and can get temperamental. That's all a given, and I think we've got to give each other space and forgiveness for being human. I would never hire anybody who had a presence or vocabulary or manner of speaking or style, if you will, of presentation that I thought was going to be diminishing, demeaning, or disrespectful to my people. Okay. That would be a problem for me, and obviously a deal breaker, if you will. And I want people, to be respected. So I want them to be able to speak, as much as they can, grammatically correct and all that. But this isn't an office setting. Yeah. I understand that when we get in the weight room, what I'm looking for is just what I would consider to be appropriate language and presentation for what's going on in the people that we're around.
Okay. No, that makes sense. And that's very important because there's a lot of different athletic populations. Each team has a different culture. So to be able to connect to them in their kind of vocabulary or word or presentation, like you said, that's very important, right? And so kind of on that topic of meaningful kind of relationships, right? Make meaningful relationships. How do you develop those, but also maintain your perception as like the enforcer in the athlete's eyes? Does that make sense?
Yep. Well, the relationship building, it's a critical piece. I'd say it's one of the most significant underpinnings in building culture and sticking around for as many years as I have. And what we wanted, is to be able to stay and be welcomed, back to their job each day. So I think you got to listen. I think you got to be engaging, caring, compassionate, all the underpinnings of any good relationship builder or relationship in general. Yeah. Those are the things that I would say have to be there for the building of a solid relationship. You got to be trusting. You got to be trustworthy. I would say when I first started, I would use the word enforcer. For me, I try not to be so much of an enforcer as I am a leader. Okay. So that just goes back to what I had said earlier. Every culture is going to have standards and hopefully boundaries, so people know what those are. Yeah. I try not to fly off the handle and get too intense with people. If I go out and speed and get over for doing 80 in a 55 mile an hour zone, the police officer probably will not be yelling and screaming at me. He or she will just write me the ticket and tell me to go on my way. When I'm giving consequences because somebody did not meet a standard that they are required to meet, I'm not much of a yeller and a screamer. There are times I am stern with people, yes, but I'm much like the police officer. I just go and I tell them, listen, you know what the standard is. Can you explain why you didn't reach the standard? Sometimes I ask that question, and other times I don't ask. But there's a consequence for that. In the enforcer leader role, I try not to use a whole lot of emotion. Okay. When I'm complimenting people, yes, I use a lot of emotion. But, again, it goes back to you want to create a culture and a landscape where your people feel safe. That doesn't mean that I'm not going to be stern, but I'm going to be consistent, and I'm not going to do stuff to freak them out. And there's all sorts of research that shows that if I get too intense and people feel threatened by me in my presentation or the wording or whatever it is that I'm coming across with, that the prefrontal cortex gets shut down, and that's where cognition takes place. Okay. So, that's why there are times when I see people yelling and screaming like at their kids, coaches on the sidelines, and I'm thinking it's disappointing to see that because the coach is thinking he or she is intense and really getting after somebody as an enforcer, and that the kid is really going to learn from that. But many times the kid didn't learn anything from it because the kid felt so threatened that they weren't able to take any part of that in.
Okay.
That's a problem, and it's not the kid's fault. It's the coach's or the leader's fault.
Yeah. No, that's a good answer. Does any of that stuff change, right, for relationships with administrators, right? Because I feel like this is an area that's not necessarily talked about. Like, we want to be friends with our administrators, but at the same time, they're our boss. So it's kind of a weird ground. So does any of that relationship advice change in regards to them?
Well, I don't know. That's a great question, too. You know, and do you mind if I throw one other person in here on this question?
No, for sure. Go for it, yeah.
The other one that I'll throw in here, because I think it's probably important, is now we don't work for the sport coaches, although sometimes it feels like they think that we do.
Yeah.
Like times that I've said to coaches, remember now, I don't work for you, I work with you.
Uh-huh.
There's a difference. But with sport coaches first, I would say it's a lot the same. I try to befriend my sport coaches, the head coaches that I work with, because I think that allows me an opportunity to play on an equal field as them and to gain more control and more trust within our relationship.
Okay.
So I think it's critical. I get on a meet with our sport coaches. I try to a minimum of once a week and hopefully optimally 2 to 3 times a week. And sometimes we'll just talk about family, things that are going on in the community, and sometimes we're talking strictly business. But that sort of open line of communication, a lot of things come out in that, and I think it keeps us on the same page. It's critical to our relationship building. Again, negotiation is constantly going on between people, and it's important that we both understand that.
Yeah.
So again, would I be caring and compassionate with the sport coach that I worked with and be respectful? Yes, all of those things. Administrators are our bosses, certainly. So I would still try to be genuine in who I am as a person. Yeah. But I understand that we all kind of put our job mask on each day. Yeah. And go in and step into our role for whatever our role is, just as they do that. So both of us, I'm sure, are as genuine as we can be. We work within the confines of those roles. Yeah. While trying to relationship build with an understanding that we both have agendas and I'm trying to work hard for my program, and they have a different picture and a different agenda. Yeah. We both have to walk in and walk away understanding that while trying to be respectful for each other. So communication here is absolutely the key. You know, back and forth. I'm not talking about just talking. I'm talking about a skilled listener also. Okay.
So can you touch on that a little bit, actually? So being a skilled listener, right? So how can we be sure that people are listening versus just hearing, or hearing versus just listening? Does that make sense?
Yeah. 2 things. So number one, when I'm teaching my staff, because I got a lot of staff that comes in for like 2-year grad assistant programs. So with those guys, the first thing that I teach them, and the reason I teach them is because there's communication studies out there that say that untrained listeners hear 15 to 20% of what's said to them. Okay. That's not good. Yeah. That's be tremendous teaching for me and reteaching if I don't get them to be skilled listeners. Okay. So for me, what skilled means, by definition, is this, and we have an acronym that we call sharing a little bit of love. So what that means is you do the L part. The L part is listening until the person is done talking, or if you've got a run-on talker, waiting until that person takes a breath and then interrupting. Okay. Second, we tell people to do the V, validate. Validation means reflective listening. Okay. And that's done by using the last 3 words of the last sentence that the person said, or by just, if they went on for a paragraph of words, you just kind of sum everything up in a sentence, and that kind of validates to the person. He gets it. He understands what I'm saying. Yeah. It really establishes kind of a connection between the two of you. And if you really want to deepen the connection, especially if someone comes in and they're venting and very frustrated about something, you try to empathize with what it is that they're feeling. So you might say, you know, if a kid comes into me and says, oh, I'm so angry because coach got after me after practice. After he got done speaking, what I might say is, I understand you feel disrespected because coach confronted you in front of your peers. And if I did it right, usually the kid will say, yes, that's exactly how I felt. And I'll say, yeah, you felt disrespected. I'd probably be hurt by that myself.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I never said I agreed or disagreed.
Yeah.
I just kind of validated and empathized with his feelings and situation.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is very skilled listening.
Okay. No, I like that approach. That's a very good approach.
Now, that's with assistants. When it comes to the athletes that I work with, what I do, because I'm not going to teach all of them to be as skilled in depth as I do my staff. Mm-hmm. With those guys, a lot of times after I give direction, I'll say, you got it? And they'll say, yeah, we got it. And I'll say, okay, repeat it back to me.
Okay. Yeah.
And a lot of times ends up working.
Okay.
Teaching them to reflective listen in a more forceful fashion to get them to do it, and gets them to be good listeners. And a lot of times if you've got standards, what you can do is just listen to their actions, and if their actions don't match up with the directions you gave, well, then you know they didn't listen. Yeah,
no, definitely. And then it just all layers on top of each other. So that's perfect. I like that. Okay. So shifting gears a little bit, right? So one of the teams that you've worked with is wrestling, with one of your wrestlers knocking out Chuck Liddell in the octagon. So can you talk a little bit on the development of wrestlers for competitive season or even after, right? So say post-collegiate and they want to go on to like MMA, boxing, WWE, whatever. Can you talk a little bit on that?
Yeah, so I don't work with the wrestling team now.
Okay.
Now, I worked with them for many years when I first got here. Very hard-working bunch.
Yeah.
Obviously, I trained Rashad Evans for his fight, and it's funny because with Rashad, I mean, if you ever meet Rashad, one of the nicest guys you'll ever meet. Really a special human being. Very kind. And to see what he's done to a few people in the octagon is weird to see. Okay. But that's what happens when you got a hell of an athlete on your hands. And he did that against a guy that was my favorite fighter of all time in Chuck Liddell.
Okay.
So I couldn't have been happier or more sad at the same time.
Okay.
With the wrestlers, if I was training them now, I'd be doing the same thing I did then. You're really trying to work on increasing max strength and strength endurance because it's an endurance sport. Mm-hmm. You're going to try to affect power. Mm-hmm. You might have a little bit of hypertrophy around certain joints because there's a high rate of overuse and it's a combative sport, so you really do have to get them stronger to support certain joints.
Yeah.
But obviously there's weight classes, so you're not going to get people as large as they can be because you're going to shift them right out of their weight classes.
Yeah.
So you get them as strong as they can be per pound of weight without gaining weight is essentially what you're trying to do. Mm-hmm. So I would do all that. I'd work on strength, endurance, power, and then I would, that one of the areas that should really be focused on, in my opinion, with most wrestlers,
what is
recovery.
That? Oh, okay.
Is recovery because these guys, they will overwork themselves to death. Okay. I mean, they're hard workers, but you know what they really are? Long workers.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Okay.
And that's how they get to skill mastery, of course. But there are times that my worry wasn't that they weren't going to be conditioned enough, but you can train the power right out of them. Mm-hmm. And you can do that when people start to get into overreaching states or overtrained states. And wrestlers, in my opinion, are notorious for having that sort of work ethic. So those would be the kind of main points that I would hit. Through various different ways. The way that I look at stuff, I don't empty the weight room and put new equipment in for each person that walks in. Yeah. But our job is to kind of perform a needs analysis for the sport, and then to try to put people in a position where they can do a lot of what they do well. Meaning that if they can't do certain exercises well because of flexibility problems or lever lengths, I'll find different exercises to be able to accomplish those same results, but in a manner that kind of suits their body type and genetics, if you will.
Okay.
So, you're going to train all wrestlers similarly, but because they don't all have the same parents, not exactly the same way.
Yeah. Okay. No, that's good. That's good. And that's a great point because the wrestling practice, a lot of it is like almost just conditioning. You know what I mean? So to focus on recovery, a lot of people might miss that. And it's right there, but like you said, it's overlooked. So I like that. And so at the beginning of the conversation, we talked a little bit about, the difficulties and of getting to where you are now, right? So will you just kind of expand a little bit on some of the struggles that have accompanied you in your 22 plus year, tenure in the field?
The struggles.
Even like social or like, anything like that, or even like personal, interpersonal.
So, I mean, the hours, this profession now, there, a lot of hours, That's a tough thing for a lot of people who have families. It can be a life alone for the families in many ways at certain times during certain seasons. That can be very challenging. Yeah. It's an intense environment. Everybody expects results sometime between now and yesterday, and sometimes the results they expect are not very realistic. Yeah. Not everybody is in our field. And sometimes, you get coaches that will expect a kid to gain, an ectomorph to gain 25, 30 pounds in a very short period of time. That's not going to happen. Yeah. Or to take, 2 or 3 seconds off a kid's 40-yard dash time. That's not going to happen if they've done any sort of training. Or to put 5 or 6 inches on a vertical jump. You have to have some realism. The other area that I think can be a struggle, and I'm lucky now because the coaches I work with now are not only the coaches I work with, they're my friends. Okay. And here for so long, so that's great. But in my 30 years in coaching, one of the big things that is very challenging for a lot of people, and it will be for a lot of the young people coming through, is that if you work with some of the higher echelon sports, there's so much pressure put onto that head coach that a head coach a lot of times is used to being the all-knowing leader and making all decisions. And you'll get coaches who will start dictating to strength coaches how they want the strength coaches to program. Yeah. What they want them to do, how they want them to do it. That's a problem. Yeah, big time. You've got people that don't have physiology, motor learning, biomechanics backgrounds who are now giving recipes of how to go about a strength coach's business. And that's a real problem. Yeah. I've had, sit downs with coaches where I've had to, as politely and sternly as I could, say, Coach, you got to let me coach here. And you'll get coaches who say, well, when I was playing, what we did was, and that may have worked for them. Yeah. But different time, a different kid, different landscape. And there's a real reason to change. But coaches are like anybody else. All of us want a perception of control. Yeah. But that can be very challenging to deal with. And as a young strength coach, you've got to be courageous and skillful in your communication, or sometimes you're going to get run over by a coach. And I've seen that happen to some of my friends in the profession also that really had a difficult time, or that ended up getting fired, or that ended up getting burned out to the point of quitting. So that's going to be a struggle. It's been a struggle for me at different times in my career. And then, looking for support. Yeah. We want more resources. We all want the 10,000 or 20,000 square foot weight room. Yeah. And you're going to be competing with all these different sports where they want resources, especially financial support. So that can be challenging. We all want to be the highest paid. That can be challenging. Keeping up with the Joneses across the street is challenging. Those are some of the major challenges that I think we're all dealing with. Yeah. No, I mean, it just helps to, even just talk about them, because everyone thinks that they're going through a unique challenge when really, a lot of us are living in the same situation. So just discussing like this, that's, that can be immensely helpful. Just knowing that people that at your level are going through it, and people at the beginning level are going through it, we all got the same struggles in a similar sense. So that's very helpful. And kind of moving off of that into a little bit of a bigger scale, right? So obviously there's a lot going on in the world, and a lot of the diversity in campus comes from like athletics, right? So how do we handle like issues of like race and social justice and things like that within the weight room, as well as like, sexism, gender equality, that kind of stuff? Do we kind of like act like it doesn't exist, or like how do we handle that? No, I don't think we act like it doesn't exist. But and listen, I'm only going to tell you from my perspective and what I do. I would never tell anybody else in their particular landscape what they should be doing. For me, it's always the same, and I'm a little bit not at work so much, but I'm an introvert, so listening comes easy to me.
Okay.
So for me, for all of these things, what I do is I just listen to the athletes, and this is how I relationship build. One of the things that I do, like when people show up, I always ask them a question. When a team shows up to lift, I always ask them a question like, "What's your favorite word? What's your favorite holiday? Favorite meal, your favorite toppings on pizza?" All of these just very random questions. And what it does is it opens up dialogue, and we end up joking around, and it starts conversations. We end up also bringing people up at the end and telling them what they did well and what we thought that they could do to improve. But we'll also say a couple of things in, and we'll let people, captains and people on the team, say something briefly. And some of these issues that you mentioned, obviously, they'll come up. As long as it is not something that is said hurtfully, disrespectfully, diminishing of someone else, I'm good with it. Sometimes they'll spark conversations, short conversations. We'll have these conversations also because I'll invite kids in for what I call check-up meetings. I'm just going to check up or check in, if you will. So they'll come in for 20 minutes, half hour after practice or some other time when they have time off. And I never know what the agenda is or what they're going to tell me. I just kind of ask a couple of open-ended questions about, hey, how are things going? Tell me some things that are going on. We always ask about, how's your parents doing? How's your sister? How'd you do on your math exam? We try to stay engaged, and I think that's an important part of coaching, where some of these issues come up. And what I do in response to all of this is I just listen. I'll be empathetic. I'll be encouraging. Very rarely do I share my personal opinions. Sometimes what I'll do is just share an opposing viewpoint if I think that someone is closed. I won't tell people what to think and that they're wrong in whatever way they perceive things, but I want everyone to kind of stay open as much as they can. I think it's hard on them if they don't, and it can put them in a position of stress and feelings of hate or fear, and that's not good for anybody. It's certainly not good for them. So these are... we live in a time now, it's unfortunate. And you sound, just from listening to you speak, like you've got wisdom and perspective, especially for your young age.
I appreciate that.
So bravo to you. But I think you got to listen to people, and because people are so divisive now, it's a landscape of divisiveness and sides. Very little compassion, very little understanding and empathy. And I don't know that I came in with it. In fact, I can tell you that I didn't. But over the years and age, I'm hoping came wisdom, and certainly came a lot more compassion and empathy. I think that that's exactly what's needed right now. So good for me, and I hope I'm able to champion some of those things in a landscape. There's so much kind of bluster and bravado. We always sell things like be the tough athlete like the Marines and like the SEALs and the highest echelon of toughness, if you will. I want people to understand also that this isn't the SEALs, this isn't the Marine Corps. And while you do have to have a level of toughness, I don't want people to live in a bubble that is so unrealistic that by the time they get out of here, they're not good humans. An opportunity to help them continue to grow and be really good humans as opposed to just really good athletes. And when you get to be my age and stayed in the profession this long, it's not that I'm not still trying to increase people's vertical, their explosiveness, their max strength, all of those things. I'm still trying to do that. I'm seeing a little bit bigger picture now where I'm really trying to mentor the person, who makes up the athleticism that I'm trying to affect at the same time.
That's a great answer, and I think a lot of us overlook how big of an effect that just listening can have on these athletes, right? Because they're constantly being told what to do, when to do it, how to do it, you know what I mean? And not a lot of people are taking a lot of time to like hear them out. So even like when you ask them some of these stuff, like, you know, they're not sure if they should really answer it truthfully or if they should even answer at all. So that's a great answer. And it's the same thing with that SEALs thing, right? Because SEALs are dealing with life or death. I mean, while this is our jobs and our livelihood, it's, you know, it's not life or death. And so I think a lot of us need to realize that. So that's a really good answer, right? And on that same vein, right? So how can we spread our positive influence on like our campus and our community on that bigger scale as well?
Well, for me, that's probably a redundant answer.
Okay.
I think I'm just trying to affect my small corner of the world. But I know that these people, you know, I keep in touch with a lot of athletes, boy, in all my years. I still keep in touch, and a lot of athletes keep in touch with me, which is special to me.
Yeah.
But what I think is that we've taught each other. I've learned along the path, my coaching path, and while I've trained them, I've learned a lot of stuff from them or from our shared experiences. And I think when they go out into the world, I have to some degree, I hate saying I because I am a small portion of a huge we here, but we've affected some of these athletes. We affect each other with consistency. And when we go out into the community, that's where obviously we are to have our effect. You know, I'm so exhausted on most days when I get home that do I go and give a lot of community speeches? Well, no, because I'm so busy doing my job. Yeah,
that's a good point.
But I'm hoping that there's certainly carryover, if you will, to the other larger issues, larger landscapes, bigger environments. What I've found, and I want to do what you kind of suggested. I would like to affect a lot of people at a time for efficiency reasons, right?
Yeah.
But what I found, I think, over the years, and this is very disappointing to me because of, you know, my want for efficiency. But if you really want to do it well, and if you really want to have an impact, I think you end up doing it one heart and mind at a time.
That's big, and that's kind of like that ripple effect, right? Like you drop the rock in the puddle, it just exponentially grows. And so, no, that's a really good way to think about it and to think about that perspective, because like you said, a lot of us don't have time or energy when we're done with the day, you know, 16-hour whatever days. So that's a really good way to put it. So last question kind of to round this thing out. So what kind of projects are you working on now? How can people reach out to you and kind of follow your journey?
Projects I'm working on, you know, I'm a narrower. I'm constantly kind of narrowing things. And for me, I'm just trying to get better every single day. I have a goal to read something every single day and take a note on that, so I can refer back to my notes and teach myself. So I'll watch or listen to a podcast. I'm a voracious reader for sure. I love learning because I love teaching. I'm doing two things, really. I'm trying, my first priority always, like when I first started, I would have probably told you that I'm really trying to build a great career. Now, I'm not trying to do that anymore. I'm trying to build a great person. I'm trying to really try to be the best person that I can be while I'm here to have the biggest impact that I can. And then I'm also trying to build, a good career where I can be of service to a lot of people. And again, as my boss always says, his favorite word is impact, and I can relate to that. I certainly want to do that also. I want to affect as many people as I can in the most positive way that I can. While I'm here. That's probably the main thing. I'm working on a couple of writing projects, but it's too early to advertise those right now. If you want to follow me, they can follow me on Twitter. They can get a hold of me here at Michigan State. My email's up on the website, and contact me that way. I usually speak a couple times a year at different clinics and stuff, and we have a clinic each year that we put on here, which is always outstanding and very well received. So those are probably the best ways.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time, Coach. I really appreciate it. You know, talking about the X's and O's is awesome, but, you know, talking about these bigger things is is what I feel like a lot of people lack. So thank you for digging into some of these questions for me, and I really appreciate your time.
You're welcome.
Thanks again for listening. And if you enjoyed the podcast, please give it a rating on iTunes. Leave feedback. If you have any questions or people that you would want to hear from, I definitely want to hear from you. So please leave that in the comments section or send me an email as well. I'm always willing to hear from other practitioners and other people that want to learn. I appreciate your continued support, and until next time, this is the Gambit of Performance Podcast.